There we go. Let me see, just double check my email to see if I've got anything.
Yeah, I don't have anything from Tish or Ray
Okay.
or Vicky on for this meeting.
Let's give Tisha another minute or two.
Okay.
How's work at the Drachman Institute, Kenny?
It's been busy, I think we're getting towards the end of the semester too, so it
Mhm.
feels like more and more things get crunched in.
Yeah.
College life. Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't miss that part about
Hmm.
academics feeling like getting to the end of the semester and being like, oh crap. I still have dreams about like showing
Hmm.
up to class and being like, wait a minute, there was a
Hmm.
test today? Like,
Hmm. Yeah, stress streams and come
yeah,
back.
yeah. That's like the only stress dream I think I really have too. It's like
Oh,
showing up and not being ready for the test.
lucky you. Kenny, are you in a year-round contract? Do you work through the summer? An academic one, but
Yeah.
with the research center starting up, I
Oh,
will
okay.
be kind of plugged in throughout the summer.
Okay.
So the work continues.
There you go. Hey, Kenny, who was running the Drachman Institute before you? Because I feel like there was this maybe just I wasn't connected, but it seemed like there was a little bit of dip in activity or at least presence in the community. I don't know if that's just my perception or what.
Yeah, we actually so the part that I'm involved with, the Housing Equity Lab, it's sort of been restructured. It's been dormant for a few years.
Mhm.
You're right about that. Um, and so the Housing Equity Lab is one of four labs that we have. One is the Drockman Design Build. One is the Native Peoples Design Coalition, and the Urban Resilience Lab. So different kind of sectors we're working in, and just I want to say a year and a half ago now, we selected a new executive director, Courtney Crossan, from our college. So I've
Got it.
got one piece of it. There's other faculty leading and coordinating the other arms. And yeah, we this past week's been a busy one because our center is going through a reauthorization renewal process with the university. So I know Courtney's been super busy with that. We had visitors come and review the program or the center overall.
Yeah, that's always the work that the people that do the work don't want to deal with. I mean, I feel like we just had our HUD monitoring visit, and it's like,
Mhm.
stop monitoring us. We got work to do, you know?
Mhm. Oh yeah, yeah. A lot of documentation, right? And a lot of conversations.
Totally, totally.
Kenny, does the financial situation at the U affect the Drachman Institute? I think it's more generally put a sort of a pressure cooker on a lot of things. You know, not just in our college, but across the different centers and colleges. And yeah, I've heard some others have unfortunately have had to wind things down. So I think it might be specific within the different corners of the university that people are in, but not a pleasant atmosphere in that regard. Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah. All right, y'all. It's 1:06. I'm gonna go ahead and start down the agenda because, as I said, I believe we do have quorum with 3 out of 5 members. So I'm gonna call the meeting to order. It's 1:06 on March 26, 2024. Um, the the Housing Desegregation Subcommittee, now retitled the uh, Equitable Housing Strategy Subcommittee, meeting has now commenced. It is March 26th at 1:06 p.m. This meeting is being held virtually due to COVID-19 to allow for social distancing and protect public health. As we continue our efforts in meeting remotely, we ask all commissioners and guests to mute yourselves until called upon to speak to avoid feedback and background noise. For those who have dialed in using the call-in number, to unmute to speak, dial *6 on your phone. Also, prior to speaking, please announce who you are to identify yourself. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. We ask that you only use the chat function to request to speak or to announce that you are leaving the meeting so that we can track quorum. Also, to comply with the state open meeting law, Attendance and votes will be done by way of roll call using audio, not by using the chat function. And with that, I will do the roll call. Lori Mazurbo.
Present.
Kenny Wong.
Present.
Jay Young, I am here. And then absent Tisha Tallman and Ray Winch. So with that, we do have quorum. And moving on down the agenda, agenda item number 3, City of Tucson Office of Equity update. I don't see anybody from the office. Is there anybody?
No, Jay, Jay, Larice Walker could not make it. She's been engaged in a series of workshops, training workshops for city staff on equity and hiring. And
Cool.
she's involved in that today.
Cool. On to number 4, City of Tucson HCD update. Neto, I don't know if you have anything.
Just one update. Saturday, this past Saturday, HCD hosted a third community meeting in the Amphi neighborhood at the former Fire Station 8 on Keene Road to talk to residents and neighbors about the proposed Housing First Resource Center. It was a good meeting in the sense that there was a good interaction with neighbors and city staff. And the city is proceeding with a PAD, a planned area development. This is a rezoning, probably late May, early June. Should be we expect it to be submitted to the zoning examiner, and then eventually to mayor and council. And you may have seen in the news that last week there was a ceremony for the new Newport at Rodeo affordable housing project on the south side, and they got some nice media coverage, and that's it for right now.
Thanks, Neto. Yeah, the affordable housing project that you mentioned, I saw an article about it in the Star, and it certainly emphasized how much demand there is for affordable housing. I believe it, said that it filled up pretty quickly, and a lot of people were hoping to get in that probably wouldn't end up getting in.
Right. And just a reminder, that project is in part funded by a LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit, as well as nearly $2 million in home funds from HCD for that project.
That's great. Thanks for the update, Neto. Appreciate it. Moving on down, number 5, vision and goals for housing desegregation subcommittee, again, renamed the Equitable Housing Strategies Subcommittee. All right, it's starting to stick a little bit now when I'm like, I forgot what it's called. I'm not forgetting so much, so this is good. But one of the things that I wanted to do, I feel a little bit bad about this, but I know we talked a lot about the vision and goals last week. And I had trouble kind of putting it together in terms of kind of what we decided. So I just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page about the vision and goals for the subcommittee. And also, I think that kind of plays into the goals also of the full commission. So apologies for going over this again, but I was just looking back over, let me see. Hey, Neto, can I share my screen? Is that possible? Let's see.
Yes, give me a moment.
Okay. Oh, I see. I think I've got access here. Oh, no, it's disabled.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, you should have access now, Jay.
All right, let's see what happens. Perfect. All right, so share. Can you guys see my screen with the housing segregation goals, the 4 in red, and then the bullet points underneath?
Can you enlarge it?
Sure, I can do that, I think. Is that better?
Much better.
Okay. So I guess my question is, based on our discussion last week, do y'all remember if there was anything that we were wanting to change with the 4 goals that are in red, or did we basically decide that we were okay with the goals as they were stated? I was looking back through my notes Um,
I think we were also working quite a bit in the retreat draft document. And so
yep.
there's some suggested language.
So that's actually where I pulled this from. Let me see. Um, do you see a new document now, a different document? Or do you still see? Okay, let's see. Hold on. New share. Document one. No, that's not it. Okay, so I think this is the document that you're talking about, Kenny. And so what I did is I pulled off of the meeting notes and copied and pasted this part into the what we were just looking at. So was there other language, Kenny, that you were referring to?
Uh, yeah, just looking at the Google Doc version, I realize there's like a couple vote versions floating around,
yeah.
but that link is in the chat.
Okay. Let's see, chat. Thank you for putting that in. Let's see. Now I'm going to stop share and I'm going to share again. Let's see if I can get these retreat notes up. Share. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down. Can you guys see that? The Google Doc.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, so there's affordable housing, right? Here's what you're talking about, I think. Got it. Um, do we just need to clean this up because we've already talked about it and kind of settled on this? That's kind of what's coming back to me. Is that what y'all remember?
Yeah, I think we were gonna, we talked quite a bit. We were gonna, if there were other things that came up as on reflecting on it, things about wording and language. Uh, but for me, I think with the edits, it it kind of captures, I think, our conversation and where I would like it to head.
Great. What about you, Lori?
I agree with that.
Okay, great. So just looking at this, we're getting rid of the main goal originally for the housing desegregation subcommittee. We're renaming it Equitable Housing Strategies. We're getting rid of that first goal, the original goal, address housing segregation by race, et cetera, et cetera. And then the ones in red, um, we got rid of the first one in red, which was be a clearinghouse. And we're going to basically have 2, 3, and 4 are going to be our 3 goals. And there's just a little bit of kind of cleanup in terms of the wording and some of the strike throughs. And I see a couple of comments aside as well that seem to be kind of integrated with the document. So I will clean up goals in Google Doc for submission to full commission. Okay. All right. Any other thoughts, comments about, did we lose Lori?
Oh, yeah.
Apparently.
If we lost Lori, we lost quorum. Let's see if she gets back in.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't see any message from her.
Let's see. Hopefully she,
I'll email her.
okay. Hopefully she just had a little glitch in the matrix.
Yeah.
We'll get back on. If I have her number. I don't have her number. There she is.
There she is.
Hey, Lori, do you have a glitch in the matrix?
I had a glitch that was just outstanding. Everything went dark.
Well, I'm glad you recovered because we were like, oh, and there goes Quorum. So, but just to finish this up, I think we're good here. Thank you for helping to refresh my memory. I think I've got better notes now. So I'll clean this up and basically when we report out at the next meeting, I'll report out that we've updated our goals, the 3 goals that we have here. Um, Anything else? Let me stop sharing here. Well, before I do that, anything else related to our equitable housing strategies goals going forward? Anything that I've missed or we've missed or anything that warrants more comment before we move on?
Well, I think a couple things came to mind, like in gathering and thinking about gathering and sharing like examples and resources and things like that. Just what is the right infrastructure to do it?
Right.
We talked about the website or a Google Drive, and to me a Google document gets a little tricky because you obviously you could be editing at the same time, and yeah. So that was one piece, and then kind of I was um at the last commission meeting, I don't think we fully figured out what is the right way to engage a broader public. How does just the larger commission, a place that folks can communicate with, that they know how to communicate with. And that was, if I remember correctly, from the last subcommittee meeting, we were kind of talking about that a little bit as well, of whether it's going out to visit different neighborhoods or talk to neighborhood associations or something like that.
Yeah.
And what's the right mode of engagement? So we're speaking to, just a broader public.
I think, Kenny, honestly, you're getting into number 6, which is great, kind of planning for the year. So I think that discussion, let's move into that if there are no other comments about the goals for the subcommittee. Good. All right. Let's move on to number 6, and why don't we just go ahead and address, Kenny, the issues that you're bringing up that we also discussed at the last meeting. So number 6 on the agenda is discuss creating a plan for the year. So, I put a bunch of bullets under here to try and allow us to have this discussion, Kenny, that you're getting started for us. So talking about, how do we identify the most pressing issues, solutions, top priorities, what do we want to create? What's the best use of our time in monthly meetings? How do we stay focused? And how do we bring forward strategies to the full commission and then to mayor and council? So, obviously we talked about, how are we identifying what the issues are and solutions. So, part of, I think, keeping this continuity is what you're talking about, Kenny, is, what infrastructure are we using and what can we use? If a Google Doc is not necessarily the best way to kind of share resources, what are y'all's thoughts about the best way to do that?
Can you share again why a Google Doc may not be the best?
I think there was concern about, like public access and comment. And if we're sharing documents, like, is that it's hard to keep it free from commentary, where we might be discussing it asynchronously.
So I'm just thinking out loud here, but I wonder if the other thing that we could use that might eliminate that issue, I wonder if we could just use like a folder in someone's Google Drive or a Google Drive that we establish for the subcommittee, because I think I don't remember, but I think with Google Drive, can you also share links I don't know. I'm just trying to think, if we don't use a Google Doc, what can we use? I mean, I think we also talked last time about having those go through HCD as well. But, I think the concern I have there is just it could be a lot, and it just feels like having a middleman is a little bit slows the process down a little bit. But, I also understand the reason that we might need to do that. Just also looking back through my notes from last.
I've seen these like kind of one page websites where, someone would still have to manage and upload things and receive links to post. But then that is something that is accessible, but then it's not like you can comment or
Right.
add anything to it. It would still have to flow through someone. And I don't know if that could be somebody like within the subcommittee or something like that. I don't know. It could be a point like I'd be willing to look further into it, but I think it would take some time and decision making altogether.
One of the things that I've used in the past, but it's been a while, is through my Google account, there used to be a thing called Google Sites, which was basically like, a way for you to create a kind of a pretty simple web page. I think like you're talking about, Kenny, so that might not be a bad idea. Because I think the other good thing is that it would be accessible to the public, or certainly could be, I think. Um, so that might not be a bad idea. I also, wouldn't if it were relatively streamlined, I wouldn't be opposed to, trying to manage that if people had things to share, if it's just a matter of like throwing up some links or, different documents and stuff. So that might not be a bad way to go. So maybe Google Sites.
The site I'm thinking about is uh, Card, and
Like,
then
got it.
with two R's.
Yeah.
And there's some examples.
Okay, cool.
And it could have the disclaimer, right? Like I think some of the things that we might share point to, it's not necessarily we're endorsing them.
Yep.
They're just items for
Yep.
discussion.
Well, the other thing that could be cool about doing it this way is, it would obviously be public facing, and, anybody who was interested in engaging with us and discussing ideas could see the things that we're putting up there and, be ready to come and discuss. I mean, I think that's part of, what we've been talking about. And again, you raised as well, Kenny, again, which is, how are we engaging with the public more broadly about these issues? So I think that could be a good way to do it. Neto, do you know if there are any issues in terms of like, open meeting laws, or just, generally what we can and can't do as a commission if we were to basically kind of start our own website that was public facing, you know what I
Good question. I don't know.
mean? Okay.
Certainly will inquire
Okay.
with Anne and City Clerk's office.
Okay, cool. Okay, so issues with website.
So again, the question is, can the subcommittee create its own website, which would be public facing, and where would it live? Would it live on an HCD page?
I think it would
in
just
the-
kind of live on its own.
Mm,
What Kenny threw in the chat
mhm.
is this card.co, which I guess is a site that you can kind of build a simple website. Um, so I think, the subcommittee would essentially
Control it.
control it.
Yeah.
So it's just something third party website, like private kind of
Mhm.
thing.
Okay, I'll inquire.
Okay, thanks, Neto. Any other thoughts or ideas about how we can gather and share resources? I mean, are there other options out there aside from the ones that we've kind of thrown out there, Google Sites or this card, or, even potentially like a public facing like Google Drive. I mean, I think those seem to be the three possibilities. Anything else that we're not thinking of in terms of how we can gather and share resources?
Sorry, the one more thing that comes to mind is like GitHub. I don't personally use it. I know it's more of a like a coding open source kind of platform. It is also as open source, it is, generally built to be public and collaborative. But I don't have personal familiarity with managing and using it.
And Kenny, what's it called? I'm sorry. GitHub, G-E-T?
GIT,
G-I-T.
HUB.com.
Okay, thank you.
Huh. Okay. Yeah, I just pulled it up. We could also write some code.
Oh,
It's a different kind of code that they work with. But
Yeah.
here's I can share, this is an example of something I was looking at. And it's from the Financial Times, just
Oh,
about
yeah.
chart visualizations. So all this stuff is out there public, and there's a README file, and folks can download and use them.
Huh. That's cool. Hey, Vicky, welcome.
Hi, sorry. Hopefully I'll still be here for a while. I'm having some internet issues today.
No
with
worries.
the weather. So if I disappear, that's why.
talk to Lori.
Yeah, Lori disappeared earlier, and we were like, "Where'd Lori go?" But then she came back. So Vicky, we are on the agenda. We are on number 6, so we're talking about various talking about the various bullet points under number 6, and kind of where we started was how we want to gather and share information about kind of equitable housing strategies, generally speaking. And we've thrown a couple of ideas out there that are essentially web-based ways to, keep up with files and documents and things that we kind of want to review or be aware of as a subcommittee. And we talked about Google Drive, Google Sites. Kenny mentioned a kind of a website builder called Card, CARRD.co. And then finally, GitHub. And Kenny put a cool example of how GitHub is used. So we've got a couple of potential of possibilities. I don't know if you have any thoughts or ideas about, ways to kind of share resources amongst ourselves. And I think the other thing that we need to make sure of is that it's like public facing and that the public can access it as well, which I think all of the ones that we've kind of described probably do. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts about that.
I don't know all of those, but it needs to be 508 compliant because a lot of what we're doing is not. And I know, Jay, I'll contact you again. I need to speak with you about something.
Okay.
And get back on track with that. But I am not familiar with a couple of the things that you just mentioned. And if they're not 508 compliant, then we absolutely should not use them. I'm not a huge fan of Google Docs but I do use it for some other things, and it's fairly accessible.
Okay. And you said Google Docs or Google Drive? I didn't. I
Oh, I said Google Docs.
Google Docs. Okay. Yeah, I think we had kind of Google Docs on the table, but Kenny brought up the fact that with Google Docs you can do a lot of commenting, and if the stuff is public facing, you know, we were kind of maybe not wanting to have public comments on documents that we have, but have it more be like stuff that is shared that everybody can see, but that's not allowing comments. You know what I mean?
I don't think you have to allow everybody to make comments.
That's true. It's a good point.
So it's pretty
Right.
easy to control who actually can make changes to a doc.
That is a good point. So maybe we do keep Google Docs on the table then. What do you guys think is the best way to kind of make a decision about what the best format would be? Because there's some on the table that, like, GitHub and card.co that I'm not super familiar with. And then, obviously with the Google stuff, would it be through one of our personal accounts that we get, go ahead, Vicky.
Well, I think whoever is suggesting those needs to do further research to see what and present what the advantages, disadvantages are, but find out if it's 508 compliant. And if not, remove it as an option.
Got it. That's great. Okay, so why don't we say then for the next meeting, Kenny, do you want to look into card.co and GitHub and see if what you think of those, make sure that they're 508 compliant, and, maybe just take a few minutes. And if you can't get very far in a few minutes, maybe it's not the best plan. I know we're all kind of busy, so I don't want to give you too much, but
I'll just say I think it's a good point, and I'm not super familiar with it. There's an accessibility page on that one service, but it doesn't seem like, I don't know. It seems like those guidelines might be a little more robust than what's there. But if there are good examples, I would be happy to receive them, or to get a look.
So I just opened that link that you posted. It looks like it's a guide for if you're going to use that accessible card. It gives a few tips if you want to make something accessible, but that doesn't mean all of the platform is. They're just giving some basic tips. And I can just give you an example. We're now my center is working with a different city department. They just invested a lot of money into a survey, but didn't require the contractor to make it accessible, nor did they test it. Launched the survey, found out it is not accessible after getting 300 responses, and now have to close it down and start all over again. And I can't say that I feel bad, because they should have done it right the first time.
Vicky, do you have any thoughts about a good way to choose something like this that we can identify up front as being 508 compliant, or is it just kind of like whatever possibilities are out there, we just kind of need to look into it and make sure?
Platforms that are 508 compliant, I can tell you, will readily brag about it, because it is a necessity for anybody receiving federal funds, as any type of government contractor, as well as federal entities. So in my experience, like if they're promoting that up front, because anybody receiving federal money shouldn't be using them unless they are. I did see the link Kenny posted. There's a note about going to WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but that's if something says that they follow like WCAG level 2 or 3, then it's most likely 508 compliant too. But they would need to specifically say that it's designed following the WCAG guidelines.
Got it. All right. So again, kind of trying to figure out from where we are now to, getting to something that's going to work for us. Hopefully next meeting. Again, Kenny, I have you down for looking into CARD and GitHub a little bit more in depth, and seeing if those will work, and then if they're 508 compliant, and then I'll look more into, I mean, I guess I'm a little hesitant now to look into Google Docs a little bit more just because of Vicky. I think you had some reservations about using Google Docs as a way to share stuff.
Not as a way to share stuff. I personally hate Google Docs just because if I have to work with documents and
Right.
because it's very limited. But if it's just a matter of sharing documents, it's okay. But then that's the other thing that I'll talk to you offline about is getting back to the accessibility subcommittee, because before sharing docs in something like Google Docs, you have to create them in a way that they're accessible.
Right.
So, you can take like an accessible platform and then put inaccessible documents in it to share, like what's being done now on the websites.
Yeah.
And so then you're still not compliant. So,
Okay. Uh,
I don't have a lot to contribute because I'm just not as savvy with document kind of things, but it might be easier, Vicky, if you just recommend one that you know that will work rather than us doing all this research, because I'm assuming you have a wealth of knowledge of um, platforms that we could go with to ensure that that we have accessibility.
well, not really for sharing documents. I mean, we make a decision for our center. And so, we use Office 365 and SharePoint. But that was a decision, for us. And then I have more knowledge about making websites or documents accessible. But when you're talking about choosing, a way to share those, that's just not something I've really gotten into. That's why I said I think um, we would need to research it. I do know the University of Arizona uses Box, um, and I also don't know how many of these are free. I think with Box, depending on how much you add, like you can get kind of a free version and add so many things, but once you start accumulating, then there's a charge. I'm not sure about Google Docs. I mean, is it, as long as you have, um, I don't know if there's any limit into what you can share. So that might be something to look at too. I mean, so what are the constraints? Like, does it need to be free, or is there a certain amount of money that we can spend per year too?
I think for most of these services these days, it's like, the free service that we would get from either Box or, if we started a new Google account or even if we used one of ours, I don't think there's any issue. I don't think there'll be any issues with like, you know, I don't think we'll ever reach the number of documents that would be the limit of the storage. You know what I'm saying? It's definitely something to be aware about, but I feel like these days the free services offer plenty of space generally for what we would share. So, but Box is another good idea. I mean, I guess the other thing I'm wondering is, do we actually want to make this more of an internal sharing? And are there issues with that? If we just decide to share amongst ourselves, um,
You mean, is there an issue if it's not accessible?
well, if it's not external facing, if we're just amongst committee members sharing stuff that we want to talk about during our meetings,
Well, so then the message is that nobody who's blind can be on the commission or part of the subcommittee
why is that?
if
Because
it's not accessible. If you choose an inaccessible platform from the beginning, that's the message that you're sending.
right. Yeah, well,
And I mean, and if anybody's okay with that, then I want to bring us back to are we talking about equity?
I, I'm just trying to figure out the best way to move forward to share documents in the best way possible and ideas, keeping in mind that we need to be accessible. So,
Yeah, I was taking that to mean something about the public facing nature of some of the sharing. And I think that's fair to ask about. Yeah, I think, for the documents, there's like two different pieces of it, right? The content, whether that's accessible, and the system by which we are sharing that content.
Right.
So maybe that's something to tease apart, and that's what was,
If
they
any
should
part
both
of
be,
it,
yes.
if
Yeah.
if you set it up in any way that is inaccessible just based on who you think current members are, it's absolutely discriminatory.
Vicky, I'm not arguing with that. I was just making the point that there's two separate things we should not confuse. The platform itself, and then, if I upload a PDF that can't be read out loud, right? That's a process that we need to make sure we follow versus the thing itself.
So in the let's say that we've picked a platform that we're using, whether it's like Box or Google or whatever, that is accessible, and then we start wanting to share documents back and forth. Obviously, we're going to come across stuff that has not been made accessible by whoever created the stuff. In that instance, Vicky, what do we need to do? Do we need to, like, if I find a document that, you know, the city of Chicago has put out about an anti-gentrification policy or something that's not accessible, what do we need to do as a subcommittee in that situation? Do we need to make that document accessible or not use it?
Exactly. Either of those.
Okay.
And so this brings up what I want to talk to you about offline to get back to the accessibility subcommittee. And so since it keeps coming up, I will say on the record, I got way behind because of some personal stuff that happened last year. But I also don't like how that subcommittee went, where all the work was put on me. And it's like, okay, Vicky, you go develop it and then bring it back. And I have to be honest, that has really been eating at me. I'm not happy about that as a commission supposedly, and I really emphasize supposedly focused on equity, that's how that turned out. So we need to address that. But yes, you can't just set it up and say, oh, okay, so we have this place, like, we dotted the I's and crossed the T's this far, but then anybody can add whatever, and there are no guidelines for that. And somebody has to ensure that it's done. For example, we have a policy at my center that if you receive something, just like you said, from somebody else that's inaccessible, it cannot be shared with anybody, the community or any staff, because everybody is supposed to get the same information at the same time. So the options are, and what we encourage, go back to the source and ask for an accessible document, or at the very least, an all text version so you can provide the alternative. I've done a lot of, making it accessible myself, but it's very time consuming. So that's why we usually push back and go to the source. But then otherwise, if you can't get that, then yeah, you either don't share it or you make it accessible. And you need somebody who knows how to do that.
Right. I mean, from that standpoint, I mean, again, I guess I'm just not super familiar, but if we are going about looking for documents, other things that we want to share, I mean, I just am going to assume that the majority of them, majority of the things, reports, et cetera, that you would be able to find and download and read from the web are not going to be accessible. Is that a relatively accurate statement?
No, Jay, I think it varies so widely, depending on the source and the type of document. But I will admit there have been things that have gone out to us that I refuse to even look at because they're so inaccessible, even with me and my cognitive disabilities, that somebody has Xeroxed by hand from a book. And it's like, I can't deal with something like that. And I know it's totally inaccessible to anybody using screen readers.
Right.
Um, so I think we need to have those guidelines. And if it's a PDF, there's a built-in accessibility checker. It's not full, it doesn't catch everything, but it's a good start to, um there's a whole other piece of that. I receive a lot of documents and they'll say, oh yeah, it's an accessible PDF, but it's not tagged properly. If you look at the reading order for somebody who's blind, things are all out of, like, if you look at the reading order of how it was tagged, it's completely out of order. Um, if we're creating documents, I can tell you how to make them accessible, because if you make your source document accessible, most likely the PDF is going to be,
Yeah.
it's really easy.
Because I
But yeah,
guess
getting things from other places, it just depends.
because I guess my concern is it seems like if everything that we share has to be accessible regardless of where it's from, then essentially we're not going to be able to share documents like we're talking about, because I just don't think it's I think it's going to be challenging in and of itself just to be able to kind of share resources with each other. And then if we're sharing resources that aren't accessible, I just think it kind of to me, I basically it makes me think that we probably can't have this kind of document sharing that we're talking about, just because if we also have to check the accessibility, which we do, that's just going to really limit, because then, I don't think it's going to be, I know that I probably wouldn't take the time to go back to the whoever put out a report that I want to share that's not accessible, to go back to them and say, I need an accessible copy for X, Y, and Z. So I don't know. I guess I just kind of feel like maybe we shouldn't move forward with document sharing.
Well, maybe it would be good to first look at, do you have some examples of things that, like, you readily want to share, and we can look at those and see how good or bad they are in terms of accessibility.
Yeah, because I mean, I have shared, and this is an example of where I did not do this, but I have shared with the subcommittee in the past resources that I've come up with, and I did just put them on a Google Doc and was like, hey, these resources are out there. I think they'll help our work, but I didn't make sure that all of the things that I put on those documents were accessible. So that's a place that we could start and look to see, what of those things that I have compiled over time are accessible or not.
Okay. Yeah, and you're right. It takes a lot of time, and welcome to my world.
Yeah.
Um, you wonder why I get grumpy, but
I get it.
I will say, in terms of, there are some changes coming down the line about accessibility, and um there's a lot of guides. There's a real push, of course, from the federal government. But there have been some big ADA lawsuits too about inaccessible websites. Um, but I will say, it's interesting because, like, Homeland Security does a really good job with accessibility. Just to give you an example of somebody that, it's not a department focused on disability.
Right.
The IRS has gotten really good and is actually involved in doing some trainings on 508 compliance. So that's why I said it really just depends on the sources.
Gotcha. Um, so maybe that's actually, we need to take a step back and first look at some potential resources that, and whether or not they're accessible, and whether or not it's going to be feasible for us to be able to find and share resources in a way that meets, accessibility protocols and 508 and whatnot like that.
I just wanted to add, I welcome learning more about this kind of area. I know it's, uh, it's important, right, for the commission's work, as you're talking about, Vicky. And I think, I want to be able to I will keep looking into the different platforms, and I think if there are examples or digestible guidance that would be helpful in going through that. Because as I was saying, kind of putting it, there is something, maybe we need to define a process of like how things get received that could be different from the platform itself. And again, I think the spirit of sharing things that we come across is an important one. And so perhaps it's a workflow trying to figure out, how do we receive things? How do we do a check in order to advance that work, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. Just taking some notes here. Um, okay, so a couple of to-dos. Kenny, you'll still look into Card and GitHub. I'll look into I think that's it. I think Vicky, is there anything that I need to do in terms of looking into like Google Docs or Google Drive in terms of accessibility or
I haven't used Google Drive. I think my experience with Google Docs, the main thing is making sure the documents that you
right?
add are accessible.
Got it. That makes sense. Okay, so that answers my question then. So Google Docs is something that it sounds like we can probably use. It's just what we put on there we need to make sure is accessible. So I won't spend time looking into whether Google Doc meets that criteria because it sounds like it does.
Yeah, and I think what you said, like there's the two things, like what software platform, I don't know what the right term is, what you're going to use, and then what gets added to it. What gets added to it, it's going to be the same guidelines for accessibility, assuming that whatever, well, so let me say aside from, well, this is partly accessibility, but there might need to be discussion about the, is it going to be only PDFs or do you include Word docs or rich text format? Those types of things. I think in general, there should be some guidelines, and then some of that might tie into accessibility.
Because I think the way that I would see it is that it would be potentially all of the above, right? It could be a Word doc, it could be a PDF. We could also just be sharing links to websites, like, hey, this city has a great policy about X, Y, and Z. Here's a link to that site for people to review. So, I would really think it would be kind of all of the above type of stuff. And I mean, that's I think the good thing about a Google Doc, right? It's like, you can just put the link on the Google Doc, or you could put a short summary. It's just there's a lot of flexibility there. So anyway, I feel like in terms of the way that we're going to share and the platform we're going to use, I feel like we've talked it to the point where we kind of know what we need to do to get to the next point. Um, is there anything else that we need to do or identify in terms of resource sharing and the platforms through which we're going to try and do it? Is there anything else we need to talk about there? Okay. Good discussion. So I guess the other thing is, once we well, and not once we get the platform, but as we do start to look into equitable policies and trying to bring those forward to the commission, to the subcommittee, again, looking at agenda item number 6, I guess I really want to have a discussion about, again, I think, Kenny, this goes to your point about workflow as well, is like, how do we identify the most pressing housing issues in Tucson that we want to focus in on? Because obviously, different groups and organizations and individuals have identified a lot of pressing issues. And then how do we identify priorities solutions, and then how are we doing, what is it exactly that we're doing in our monthly meetings? Are we, how are we finding out the things that we want to bring forward? And then how are we, processing that in the subcommittee? And then how are we getting that to the full commission and mayor and council? So does that make sense to y'all? What I'm kind of trying to get at? I guess I'm basically like, as we think about this next year, how are we going to approach this? What does our workflow look like? And what do we really want to be doing in this subcommittee meeting?
I mean, I'd be curious, and maybe it's a starting point of what are some of the kind of research centers or reports, the things that we in our own work are going to regularly, as just as a starting point to know, what has been useful for our work, and then perhaps share and discuss some of those things that we feel are applicable, or important lessons that we've learned, information that's available. And I think it'll, yeah, sort of a kind of a baseline of, okay, here's what we're looking at. What else should we be looking at? What are some of the gaps, right, that we're identifying in what's in our orbit so far?
Mm-hmm.
And then taking time to both share and talk about those things with one another and seeing, okay, and then deliberating what could be advanced for, what seems like a fit. Again, what needs further information.
I guess what also I struggle with in like what we're supposed to do and could do in this subcommittee is, again, this idea of identifying the most pressing housing issues. Because like I really like what you said there, Kenny, but how do we identify what we're really wanting to focus in on in Tucson, and then what you were talking about surfacing, possible policies or solutions or what have you from websites that we know or groups that we know that are doing good work. Especially considering there are a lot of reports and whatnot that the city has put out that is identifying ostensibly the things that we should be looking at. So I don't know, what are y'all's thoughts about narrowing down and trying to identify maybe a handful of things as the most pressing issues, or at least the things that we think we want to focus on? Because I know one of the things, right, is like kind of going back to the goals. One of the goals of the whole commission, I think, is gentrification. I mean, that's something that has not gotten a ton of attention, so that might be something we could think about. But how do we identify a handful of things that we want to drill down on?
In terms of housing, it feels like there's two separate tracks, one for home ownership and one for rental properties. I don't know exactly how we break those down further. I mean, we're well aware that there isn't enough affordable housing in Tucson, because the city has given us their reports, but it feels like two separate issues. Home ownership and renting, which then of course encompasses gentrification and racist housing policies. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's where my mind went.
Mm-hmm. The something that I think about too a lot that I don't think that we have dug into as a subcommittee or as a full commission is housing stability. And I mean, to me, it just feels like, there's at least a quarter of the population, and I'm kind of making it up, but there's a sizable portion of the population that is in constant housing instability. And what are the elements of housing policy that really create the housing instability? What are the things that could be put in place that would dramatically keep people's housing more stable? Is it like giving every family under a certain income $1,000 a month, or is it like, oh, it's really just about building more housing, or is it the speed with which you can evict people? Like, what is it that that is causing people to be housing unstable. And I think for me, by and large, that's renters. I mean, you do have some instability for homeowners, but the foreclosure rates are still very, very low, even though housing prices have gone up, and housing stability is at a crisis level. So
I think you're getting at one of the things, which is, how low income renters engage with landlords. I mean, I think that, the city has had a hard time keeping slumlords out of Tucson, right? And you see entire complexes being condemned, and an entire complex full of people, becoming homeless, and then the city is rushing to help those folks because it's large scale and it's on the news. But then you've got all those folks that have been waiting, right, for housing, and it compounds it. And there are well-known complexes in Tucson. When I worked at our family, we knew which complexes would rent to our folks, and we also knew those complexes were not great. And it comes down to not having a choice, right? And I think that's pretty unacceptable, especially given that a lot of the folks in those complexes are folks who are getting some type of government assistance to be there, right? So basically what we're saying is, sure, we'll use government. I mean, I know none of us like that or want to do that, and I'm not implying the city wants to do that, but what we are doing is using federal dollars to put people in substandard housing.
right, and then I feel like the narrative, basically, which is totally understandable, is you know officials don't want to enforce whatever they could enforce that might make slumlords have better properties, because they're like, well, if we do that, we're going to take units off the market, or then nothing's going to be available. So it's like a real catch 22. But yeah, I certainly know what you mean, Lori. That's a good point.
I also just think that the state of Arizona's laws around housing make it difficult for us as a municipality. Because to your point, you said what would help? Well, rent control would help, but the state of Arizona has a law that says we can't do that. Like not allowing, like, even if we didn't have rent control widespread, not allowing landlords to raise the rent a certain percent beyond a certain percentage, right? Because we're seeing folks get their rent almost doubled in some cases. And that's just not sustainable. And that's not, I mean, I think the other thing is it's not good for us as a city either, right? Like it's not just about the folks that can't afford housing. Um, that causes more homelessness, which causes more issues, which causes more money being used towards sheltering people rather than finding, permanent housing and things like that. So I think it's just housing is such a large issue for us in town, and we have so many aging complexes.
Yeah. And also another thing that's happened, I don't know if you guys have followed this in the news, but the past couple of weeks, the Attorney General's office, sued several large landlords in Arizona for price fixing. They're all using this
Oh yeah.
pricing company that has an algorithm that the CEO was bragging about how much the algorithm was able to raise rents, creating more profits for their clients. So that's another thing, obviously, where the market is working in such a way that it's raising prices more than essentially what the market should bear if it were a truly competitive market. But so again, I wonder if maybe the next meeting, as we're really trying to dig in, maybe between, so what we're in March, so we're going to have 9 more meetings. I'm just wondering if maybe we want to get a little bit of a timeline together where maybe April, May, and June we really try and identify the most pressing housing issues in Tucson that we as a subcommittee want to address or find policies to address. And at the same time, we're, compiling resources that, may, or policies or resources that, might be useful that we want to elevate to deal with those issues. And maybe really what we're doing in our meetings is really just doing that, where we're, digging into, we can look at some of the city reports and just, narrow down, because we've got a good list going so far, right? We've talked about housing stability, home ownership and rentals. Kenny, you mentioned like bringing forward to the group other research centers or think tanks or, other places that we're looking at housing policy that we like and bringing that forward. So I'm wondering if maybe the, from April, May, and June, we essentially have our meetings focus on those two things, which is pressing issues, identifying pressing issues, and compiling and discussing potential solutions. I'm just thinking out loud here, y'all, but what does that sound like in terms of, creating a plan for the year and creating a little bit of structure for what we do so that, we can, after some months, bring forth a product of some sort to the full commission with policy recommendations.
I'm all for that.
Yeah, thanks for the link, Vicky. That's helpful guidance. And yeah, I like that idea. I think the, kind of underscoring the difference in stability for renters and homeowners, just want to put my support behind that as well. And for some of the things that are kind of, we're limited in our jurisdiction, I don't think that should prevent us from raising those as impactful ideas.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that, Kenny. If we just didn't bring up things that folks said we couldn't do, like half the things people accomplish would never get done. But I guess I just had to throw in there because, the state of Arizona has some very frustrating laws that affect housing in so many ways.
Yeah, and I do think, the idea of, because I feel like the source of income um, idea is one of those ideas where people were like, oh, well, it's just going to get preempted at the state. So, we shouldn't do it. And, here we are some time later where, it has been in effect and the state hasn't preempted it. So I think it is good to raise those things. And, the other thing we can do is we can strongly encourage, however we want to word it, to mayor and council to, lobby through whatever, entities they have to get these laws changed. Because I do think that, they are a powerful lobbying arm, state elected officials and, city council members and whatnot to, put pressure on the state government. So, yeah, I think those are all great points. Anything else about number 6? Again, I feel like I struggle a little bit with this in the subcommittee, just trying to make sure that we're creating a framework where we're able to get together and actually, have productive discussions, which I think we do, but that actually end up leading to things that we're taking to the full commission and eventually to mayor and council. At this point, if we kind of, again, focus on what we've talked about, focusing our meetings in April, May, and June. Again, kind of working and talking about distilling what the pressing issues are in Tucson that we want to focus on, and then continuing to compile and discuss potential solutions. If we just make that the bulk of our meetings, an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. If that suits everyone and that seems like a good way to get to, by our meeting in June, having those issues distilled and at least having some potential resources and ideas to move forward. Does that sound okay to everybody? Is there something else that we could kind of include to make a framework that's going to help us to be productive? Anything that y'all can think of at this point that would be helpful?
So I don't know if I can articulate this well. I was just thinking when something Lori was explaining, and it, you know, really occurred to me that how, especially with people who are unhomed or, so we have, and who are becoming unhomed, there's so many other issues that are connected, and it really ties into, financial stability and financial wellness. I don't know how much influence we have over this, but I keep looking for like tangible things we can do because I want to see progress. And so this isn't immediate, but I just wondered in looking at what the city of Tucson does in terms of, housing and community development, um, what are ways we can influence even minor changes to benefit people? And so I'll give you an example. And I want to emphasize this was under a previous administration that I am so glad is not here anymore. And I'm specifically talking about housing and community development. But there are grants for like home repairs and home modifications. And so this is many years ago. And I'm giving this example because I only know what I influenced in terms of disabled people and seniors, um, but in that getting that funding, one of the requirements at that time was that any recipient who was getting a home repair or home mod had to have home insurance, housing, insurance. And we fought really hard to get that, well, many changes, but one of the changes for people over or 62 and older and people with disabilities was to get that requirement removed because it doesn't take into consideration the insurance discrimination that goes on, and that to get home insurance, a lot of times insurance companies are really surreptitiously using credit scores, in deciding whether they're going to write a policy. And we know, I mean, there's lots of research to show people with low income tend to have poorer credit scores, right? And so that's just an example. I mean, we had a whole list and went all the way to the mayor, and we got changes. Things are fairly different. I mean, everything's been going smoothly under this administration, but I really haven't paid attention, I'll be honest, to, like the home repair program, or some of the other areas. Just because, and I probably don't have to explain this because you all would understand, but through those grants, we're typically serving people with very low income, and they can barely pay their bills every month. And so, and I remember the previous administration was like, why wouldn't you want to get home insurance if you could? Like, what's the big deal? And it's like, they're trying to put food on the table and keep the electric on. Like, it's not a matter of, I mean, they literally are living paycheck to paycheck. And yes, of course, who wouldn't want homeowners insurance if you could have it? And so it took a lot to, do some education on that. And I think that if it's required in the other program, I think whoever's getting those grants can use some grant money to help people get it. But like that, to me, it might seem like a small thing, but it keeps people in their homes, right? Like just eliminating some of those additional hurdles to keeping people in apartments or in their own homes. And, for a lot of things, and I'm just looking at, really looking at what the city requires, and is it also is it a federal requirement that's dictated, or is it something that we put in place, like the criminal? So at the same time, they wanted to do criminal background check. I'm like, really? Somebody who needs a ramp put into their house, you want to do a criminal background check? Like, for what reason? And I'm not saying that's in place now, but and I'm sorry, we're dealing with bureaucracies and government. And so I just wonder if at some point, are there areas where we could make an impact with even some of those types of changes that would help keep people in their homes or get into a home and stay there?
Yeah, that's
Aside
a great.
from legislative stuff that needs to be done.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Vicky, because what I jotted down in my notes as you were talking, and I don't know this captures it exactly, but there is, I think, something to be aware of as we're working, of like the really big picture stuff versus like the details in the bureaucracy that are small barriers, but for folks who are really, living on the edge, small is major. So I get what you're saying. I think it's a really good thing to keep in mind. And again, I think it just kind of gets me back to also like, and I'd like to move on down the agenda because we're kind of bumping up on time, but really, how can we stay focused on doing work with our limited time that's going to have an impact? So how do we do that? Big picture, and kind of what that looks like. Again, I'm kind of rambling because I don't exactly know the answer, but I think over the next 3 months, it's definitely something to keep in mind. And with that, what I would like to do is, I think we've covered most of the stuff under agenda item number 6 at this point, at least enough to feel good about moving on. So I'm going to go ahead and move us on to number 7, and I feel like we have talked a lot about this as well. So I feel like our discussion has bled over into this a decent amount, and we've kind of put out there that this is part of what we need to be just doing going forward. So I'm just, unless anybody has anything like just major that they'd like to put on the table now that kind of can't wait for next month or the following month, I'd like to move on. But if anybody's got anything under 7 that they'd like to say, let's do that now. Okay. If not, let's move on to number 8, action items. And I think I really want to combine this, or at least be thinking about our next steps. And one of the things that I really want to do, next steps is number 11. I want to make sure that we're together putting together the meeting agenda for the next meeting together, because I feel like I kind of get out of the meeting and I'm like, wait a minute, what we talked about a lot. What do we want to have for our next meeting? So why don't we, if it's okay with y'all as well, why don't we talk about action items as the meeting agenda for the next meeting under number 11? So I'm going to move on to number 9, action items for CEHD. Or Lori, did you have something? No, okay. Netta?
No, just to obviously point out my bad. I didn't change the date on the next step for them.
That's okay. I think we still kind of need to figure that out as well. Okay, so any action items from CEHD, Netta? Are we good for number 9?
No, we're good.
Okay. Number 10, call to the audience. This is a time when any member of the public may address the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development and the Equitable Housing Strategy Subcommittee. Due to time constraints, the total time allocated for this is 15 minutes. Individuals are allowed 3 minutes each. Due to open meeting law, Commission members cannot discuss topics that are not on the agenda. Items brought up at the meeting may be considered as an agenda item for a future meeting. Is there anybody in the audience, Netta?
There is no one in the audience, Jay.
Okay, great. So we are on to number 11, next step. So a couple things we need to do here. We need to figure out a good meeting time. I know that Kenny had a conflict, but I know your semester is winding down. I don't know that we landed on a date and time. Does this what I guess is the last Tuesday of the month from 1 to 2:30? Does this work for everybody? At least for the next few meetings? So I think that's what we have got going on here, right? This is the last, I mean, yeah, last Tuesday of the month.
Correct.
Last Tuesday, okay.
So that would be the last Tuesday of April would be April 30th. From
And I
1.
would not be available then, sorry.
Okay. Kenny, what times generally work for you around your academic schedule?
I would say Tuesday afternoons generally tend to work, but not for next month.
Got it.
And then I think for Thursdays, uh, depending on when the full commission meeting is, like the other Thursdays, those tend to be a little bit easier because I know to plan revenues.
What does so if we did the last Thursday of the month, that would be Thursday, April 25th. What does that look like for folks? I mean, I'm really flexible the entire day on Thursday the 25th. What about others?
Are you looking at a particular time, or you just mean in general that day?
Just in general that day, because I think everything on my calendar is pretty flexible that day. Do people have any flexibility that day?
I have quite a bit of flexibility that day.
And I see Kenny nodding as well. What about you, Vicky?
The only thing I have that I can't change is at 11 from 11 to 12.
Okay. Kenny, do you have a class or a conflict on the 25th at all during the day?
No, classes start to wind down, and I think we had previously had asked to move to like 1:30 and beyond, but if it were to be at 1, that would be fine.
Do y'all want to do 4:25? So April 25th at 1:30? I see all nodding heads.
Yeah, that is a little bit of, does it give us a little bit of time? Because that's not the commission meeting, is it?
No,
No.
commission meeting is April 4th.
Okay, yeah, no, that works.
Vicky, does that work for you?
Yes.
Great. Okay.
1:30 to 3, 90-minute meeting.
Yeah. That wasn't too bad. Okay, so got that out of the way. What about action items and our agenda for the next meeting? I guess I would just start with, um, 1, 2, 3, and 4. I think we'll just all kind of always have on the agenda. So the next one's what for this month is item number 5, item number 6, item number 7. Those are all just things that I made up for us to discuss. So does this agenda, how could or should we modify this agenda for our next meeting to cover the stuff that we want to talk about? Or does this work okay?
Sorry, do you mean the format of the agenda or the points that are like the numbered points?
The numbered points like 5, 6, and 7. Those are the things that I came up with, that I feel like is the meat of our meeting that we're discussing. So, number 6, 7, 5, 6, and 7. Do we want to change those, add, remove anything? I guess we kind of don't need to do the vision and goals, so we can kind of get rid of that. But, in terms of the hour or hour and 15 minutes that we really want to try and spend dealing with equitable housing policies. How does this agenda seem like it would work again, or how would we edit this agenda to make the best use of our time for our meeting?
Just because I know it'll be an action item, if we could revisit the kind of the file sharing and how to, share resources with one another in a way that is accessible and is useful for us.
Yep, that's great. And I have that as kind of one of our main action items, I feel like, that we talked about. So yeah, that makes sense. What else? Anything else that is kind of not on the agenda that we had this week that we should add, or anything that we should remove, or what else do we need to do with this agenda to do what we want to do for our next meeting?
I mean, if folks were interested in sharing some of those things about even if it were just in discussion to start with, of the resources that they're using throughout their work, or places that I think that would be useful for us to reporting, data, information, anything like that, we could have a discussion. Bring one or two examples.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so that's an action item that collect some stuff and bring it to the table to talk about next time. I would say another action item is identify some documents or ideas, or some things to really focus in on identifying the most pressing housing issues in Tucson, and maybe also what's working.
And I'm sorry, I will have to go at 2:30 shortly.
Cool. So I think what I'm seeing is I'll take number 5 off of the agenda, and then I think 6 and 7, I'll just review this, but I do think that maybe I'll combine it into one. But it seems like all the things that we're wanting to talk about are kind of captured in those bullet points. So if there are no other thoughts or additions to the agenda, I think I've got enough to do the next agenda and share forward, and maybe I'll get an email out with action items. If there's nothing else, I think we can adjourn the meeting. Any last minute thoughts, concerns? Okay, if there's no objection, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, bye.